Welcome to our author chat. This is our first edition where we are going to interview one another about some of the background of our books and some of the fun that went into creating them.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us. I'm Audrey Glenn.
I'm Diana Davis.
And let's get started talking about the book that everybody loves, including me, A Gentleman's Daughter by Diana Davis. Tell us about this book.
This book is about, you can see, I almost called her by her married name. That's so funny. Cassandra Crofton. And she has recently been orphaned, and she and her sister are forced to come live with their uncle who lives in the American colonies. So they're leaving England at the beginning of the book. And they're on the ship, they meet Lord David Beaufort, the youngest son of the Marquis of Dorset. And my kitten is climbing things in the background, but they don't get along. It's kind of hate at first sight. And when they get to the colonies, he kind of helps them a little bit and ends up renting a flat from Cassandra's uncle. So they're kind of tied together.
Okay, so Cassandra and David meet on the ship to America. They don't like each other. Right. Any reason why? Why do they have such a bad first impression?
Well, they both feel that the other one does not show them the respect that they deserve. Cassandra is a gentleman's daughter, as you might guess from the title, and David is the son of a marquis. And so they are both familiar with society and how the nobility work, and they expect to be treated a certain way. And, when they don't get that from one another, they do not like that.
So how did they get this way? Like, tell me about their background, childhood experiences.
So for Cassandra, she feels very self-conscious about having lost her status in society. She is now destitute, and it's not a position she's ever been in, and relying on the generosity of her relatives and their kindness to be able to eat. And that's not a position that she was ever in. Her husband, or not her husband, but her father was was prosperous enough that they never had to worry about those things. But now both of her parents are gone, and the cousin that inherits her father's entailed estate refuses to support her and her sister. And then for David,
it sounds like it really stings for her to feel that David is not respecting her when her loss is so fresh.
Yes. And for David, he is the son of a marquis, but his parents have never liked him at all. They actually, you find out through the course of the series that they actually kept him basically sequestered away from the family, and almost didn't acknowledge his existence. And you find out at the end of this book, well, maybe I won't spoil the end of the book, but he is leaving to find his own purpose and his own place, and somewhere where he won't be treated that way. And so to have someone else instantly treat him poorly and not show respect to him is very triggering to him.
Well, their loss, the Beaufort's loss, because David is amazing, and they could have had 20 years with him, and instead to lock him up,
yes, we love David and we hate his family. So
yes, very difficult to understand the reasoning behind that, for them to not want to enjoy and appreciate him while they still had him in their midst.
Right. I mean, of course they have their reasons. They had lost another child, and we're hoping a daughter, and we're hoping to have another girl. They're a very classic of the era nobility marriage. There's no actual love in the marriage. And his parents are both pretty messed up. So very self-involved, his parents.
Okay, so Cassandra is orphaned and destitute. Other than that, what can you tell me about her?
Cassandra really wants to find a purpose to her life in the colonies. She felt like she had a place and a way to contribute to her society in England where they lived. Shoot, I'm blanking on where they lived. Oh, Surrey. So she felt like she had a way to contribute to society, a place in Surrey and the society where she was coming from. And she's completely lost that. And she finds that she really enjoys actually nursing, as in nursing sick patients and working with them, where other people might feel a bit squeamish. She is very interested in the medical side. And so she finds a place taking care of the sick as there is an outbreak of smallpox. And so she's very concerned with helping others and with doing the right thing. And then for David, his personality is, gosh, we love David so much. David, obviously he wants to be respected. David very much focuses on his accomplishments. Like he feels like he is what he does, and he's able to, he also wants to find a place in the American society for him, and he wants to be able to help people too. And he's looking for a purpose as he comes here. And gosh, you really can't talk about David's personality without talking about his wardrobe, because he is very much into fashion. He looks good in whatever he wears. If you played that game as a kid, what game was that?
And
yeah, did you play that game?
No, I did not.
Okay.
It sounds really fun. David is also kind of a fashion icon for like literally everybody in the entire series.
Right. David, and they do note later on that the way that David dresses is actually extremely formal at all times. So he is the guy that's wearing a tux to work, but except he doesn't have a job. So he's above working. So
his job is being amazing. So
right.
he
wears a tux around the house.
So are there any quotes from David and Cassandra that you think really typifies them as characters?
So this is hard. David is iconic throughout the series. My daughter came to me the other day, and the very last Christmas book she had just read, this was like 3 days ago, she had just read it, and she's like, this line is David. But it said he was off to create havoc.
I feel like they're like every book in the series is like David being David. It's like probably one of the very best parts of those books, even the books that aren't about him.
Yeah, but I mean, really, they are all about him. So
true.
You can tell that we're a little like almost unhealthy in this. Okay, so for David, a couple of his iconic quotes from this book are, it's only money. And Cassandra, when he says that, she's like, well, that's great when you have it, money is great when you have it, but she doesn't have any anymore, and she's relying on her uncle's charity to be able to eat. But what he means, and he explains that, is that, he talks to her a minute later, he's like, everyone in this house cares for you. And she's kind of like, okay, what are you gonna say? Like, and you don't? He's like, I understand that it makes life a lot easier, but it's still only money. And it's not until the ending that she understands what he's saying by that. And then the other one comes, go ahead.
It broke her heart as much as all the rest of us.
And then for Cassandra, oh no, sorry. And then my other favorite line of David's from this book is in the epilogue, where he samples the punch that Cassandra's uncle is serving at their wedding feast. And it's awful, to his taste. Cassandra's uncle's family, her aunt was raised Quaker, and she was read out of meeting when she married outside of the faith, but she raised the kids teetotaling, and they pretty much don't drink. So there's no alcohol in this punch. So David does not appreciate that. And anyway, so it's kind of a running gag in the epilogue that he doesn't like the punch. And at the end, the epilogue, they decide that Helen will move in with them because Helen and Cassandra have never lived apart, and they're both upset to leave one another. And he's like, you can't cry. I can't. So he's like, and when it's settled, he's like, okay, that's great. We'll celebrate. Bring out more punch. Or do you have anything else?
Yes. his hospitality, especially as he moves into better lodgings or more grand lodgings over the series, is definitely also, his hospitality is something that I think the other characters look forward to.
Yeah, he's a very generous. Like, we don't want to, we don't want to underestimate his generosity. What am I trying to say? It's not underestimate.
But I mean, I do think he started hosting all these events because he wanted to control like the punch and the. He's very generous, but
it's not so much control as he didn't want to have to drink their punch. He's not trying to control. He's just like.
He's incredibly generous throughout the series to everyone, and he also takes advantage of his own generosity by being able to,
including he's generous to everyone, especially himself. Like, I am not putting up with that. So.
Yes, definitely.
Don't worry, I know that this party is bring your own wine, so I did. So for Cassandra, they trade wits a lot initially when they don't like one another. And so for Cassandra, one of my favorites is when she accidentally walks right into him, and he's like, oh, I beg your pardon, and she's like, oh no, your mercifulness. Try that again. Oh no, your mercifulness. It is I who must beg your forgiveness. How rude of me to have struck the path of your elbows. She rubs her arm where she collided with him. I seem to have found the only part of your body sharper than your tongue.
Do you think so? David is like annoyed at that point, right? But yes. Do you think there's a part of him that kind of appreciates her
wit?
Sarcasm?
Absolutely. Yeah, wit. He later on tells her many times that he likes trading wits with her. And she's like, no, you definitely don't. He's like, well, I don't mind when your sarcasm is like aimed at someone else, but
right. Just not, he doesn't want to be the recipient of it.
I don't hate it when you're making fun of somebody else.
Is that one of the things that brings them together, or what do you see as how do
that is probably the first thing that David appreciates about her, is that she's intelligent and that she's quick-witted. He likes trading barbs with her. As they continue, he gets very sick from his smallpox inoculation, and Cassandra spends time taking care of him, and he really appreciates the care that she shows him. It's not something that he's really experienced in his life. Someone genuinely caring about him and seeing past the accomplishments that he thinks will give him value and make him a valuable part of society. She cares about him, and she sees past his appearance as well. Like, it's extremely difficult to imagine, but she sees past his amazing handsomeness and his wardrobe. Although, as he's ill, he's not sitting around and he's not laying in bed in his tux. And so she proves to him that she cares about him as a person.
And he has pustules, right?
He has pustules, and he thinks that's disgusting. I think that's disgusting, but Cassandra's into the medical stuff, so
right.
She's just like, I'll just take care of you, so she can handle it. And I mean, maybe there's supposed to be some sort of symbolism there. It's all subconscious for me, so I'm just as talented. And then for Cassandra, she sees that he wants to help people. He wants to be a good person, and that he is a lonely person, and that he hasn't had someone to care for him kind of his whole life, and he that really tugs on her heart, and she realizes that he's actually not that bad as she takes care of him, and they fall in love and they make plans to see one another again. So
their relationship throughout the series is one of my favorite things about the entire series. And I think they're really protective of each other. I mean, I think David's protectiveness of Cassandra is pretty evident and apparent, but there are times where, Cassandra's just really respectful of David. And even if he is prissy about, the manners or the dinner, and she doesn't give him a hard time or make fun of him, and she's kind of accepts and encourages him in a sometimes in a forceful way, but often I think they have a very healthy admiration and respect for each other.
Yeah, and I also, another thing that I find really important is that she doesn't push him to until very late in the series. She doesn't say that he needs to write his mom or be in communication with them at all. She respects the boundaries that he wants to hold with his family. So
I think that and that probably ties into what David, what one of his lessons is. Like, Cassandra definitely didn't go for him because of his family connections, and she's really happy with the family that they have in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and that's like a big theme of the first book, is that they both learn that their position in society is not that important. So the thing that, you know, frustrated them about one another is not getting respect for the position that they felt they deserved in society. They realize that that doesn't matter. And so at the end of the book, you know, small spoiler, David decides not to use his courtesy title any longer.
Which apparently shocks a lot of other characters from the series.
Especially the ones from England who are like, he does what? I don't understand.
Right. As much as we love these two characters, they are not the only characters in the book. What are some of the significant side characters that really make the book wonderful?
I think for each of them, they both have one character in particular that helps to, you know, acts as a foil and helps to characterize them. And for Cassandra, it's obviously her sister Helen. They're together from the opening of the book. The book closes with them deciding to continue to live together, even though Cassandra's married. And they actually live together multiple times throughout the series. The closest that they show, I have 3 sisters. We came into this knowing that we wanted to write a series of sisters. And so we actually didn't start with Cassandra and Helen. We started with the Hayes sisters, who are in books 3 through 7. And then we were like, well, you know, how can we tie this in? Because we know that, you know, English historical romance is very popular. So how can we tie this in? So we thought about that, and we're like, well, what if there's a cousin? And I know it's shocking to think that David was not the genesis of this series, but he came in, you know, as late as you can for the hero of the first book. He came in pretty late to the idea. So
it's like planting a bunch of seeds in the ground and having a rare blossom emerge unexpectedly.
Yes. So yeah, the way that Helen and Cassandra relate to one another, and they can tease one another. In particular, we always think of that scene in the carriage where Helen's kind of teasing Cassandra about David, and she calls, you know, they make kind of irreverent jokes about him being her lord, and but the way that they care about one another and they take care of one another and want the best for one another. And then for David, one of our other favorite iconic characters of the series is John Westing, his valet. And they, so initially this book was written as a much shorter version, about half as long, or a little more than half as long as it is now. And as I was expanding it to make it the same length as the other books in the series, because that was probably the #1 thing in the reviews, is that I wish it were longer. So I fulfilled that wish. And I loved going back and having more time with David and Cassandra, but always David. And so we got to meet John initially, or, you know, we always call him Westing. We got to meet him initially and see how he got his job, and learn how he learned his trade and how he became the greatest manservant of all time. One of our favorite things that Westing does is he always has fluffy white rolls whenever you need them. So one of our sayings is carb me, Westing. Give me the carbs. We need Westing.
For real, we all need a Westing around with fresh rolls that live in the dream. With David and his waistcoat and Westing with his rolls, like, really doesn't get better than that.
No.
Yeah, it's so interesting how siblings really is one of the most central themes to the series.
Absolutely.
And I think we knew we would have siblings, but I don't think we understood how much those sibling relationships would play a really big part in, you know, all of our characters' lives.
Yeah, which is kind of funny because we both come from large families. We both have large families now. Like,
I think there's something really special though about like this time period where multi-generational families were more common, and where people really didn't. Yes, and then also, like, especially young women didn't really leave the home, you know, unless they were to get married. And so when you think about the culture in which they were living, like, you have these adult siblings living together for a long time, and that just created some really unique opportunities that we could explore, and I think was really fun to think about.
Yeah, and even past marriage, some of our siblings live together, as we mentioned, and it creates a great dynamic, and yeah, it's a very family centered culture, in a way that we have a very atomized familial culture in our country now. I live 2,000 miles from my parents and 500 miles from any family members, and hate it. And it's really hard. And I don't think that we were intended to live this way. So, some of this is wish fulfillment fantasy that, you have your grandparents right there, and you have all your cousins around you. And
now I'm realizing that literally almost every single one of these books revolves around a sibling relationship or another. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
I don't know about Temperance so much, but obviously Constance definitely does.
Owen's relationship with his family as a caretaker, and then we have Gilbert and Phineas and Fisher and Lydia, and Henry has no siblings. He's a weirdo.
He has Lowell. What are you talking about?
Yes, okay, that's true.
He has the worst brother of all. Well, one of the worst. There's George.
Yeah, and but his relationship to his brother is important. So.
And it's funny too, because we kind of sometimes feel bad because we give our heroes the worst parents. Almost all of them have terrible parents. Lawrence, his parents are fine; they're just gone. But they had the worst parents.
Well, and so David, David's relationship to his family kind of is an unfolding mystery throughout the series, right? That we slowly find out more and more about that. And I really love how he kind of ends up learning the lesson, or confirming the lesson, that your family is your family, but it's also the people you choose to be your family. And
you're like your spouse, right? You choose
your spouse, and on all the bromance that we have growing up.
Oh, we love our bromance.
David and every hero except for Henry.
Henry's just intimidated, let's be honest.
Wants to be in a bromance with David.
Everyone does.
So we talked a little bit about that, the time period, but what did you find really interesting about researching this book, or while you were researching this book?
I fell in love with the fashion. It is amazing. Just the whole era. I actually bought 2 full outfits of 1770s, 1780s clothing. And and the men's fashion was amazing. It was so gorgeous. The embroidery, and the way, the fact that you could wear flowers embroidered on your coat and still be a very manly man, very secure in your masculinity. Or maybe that's just David, but
this is the heyday of men's fashion for sure, because after this time period it's pretty
boring.
Much black and gray forever.
Yeah, and it's and it is more colorful. Yes. And I mean, okay, let's be clear, for this is extreme upper class fashion. And then, you've got the regular upper class who could wear pastels, which was fashionable for the upper class, but most people were wearing pretty boring colors. So because that was cheap.
True. Yeah. They did have some pretty amazing, I'm always shocked to see the extant wool colors. I think they're so vivid even to this day, which is incredible to me. I could talk forever about the material culture and the natural fibers.
I have my spinning wheel right here, Justin. Here's my spinning wheel right there. So I don't use it, but I have one.
Yeah,
it came with my looms, which I have used. So
yeah,
we're into it. We're into the fiber arts. So
I think that it's very easy to take a very just to have a lot of hubris about thinking about our culture and
they were superior, or we like to think that the way that they dressed was stupid, and it absolutely was not. They did not live in environmentally controlled houses, and the way that they dressed was designed for maximum comfort. We were told that corsets are restrictive and that they were, the patriarchy. They absolutely were not. that is completely ahistorical. They were the equivalent of bras. They were the supportive garment. They also offered back support. And rather than having to alter your body, you could alter your clothing very easily. And nobody was under the illusion that that was what you looked like under your clothes, and they didn't care.
And it provided structure to the clothing as well. Your clothing could be pinned into your corsets. And
all of their clothing is really adjustable, which, I mean, if you're a woman, you know how important that is over the course of a month and your life. All clothing or almost all clothing, this is not so much for men, but for women, clothing was entirely bespoke. So you didn't have off the rack sizing.
I'm thinking too, just about, I saw a kind of I guess a sample book that would have been used in a tailor shop to show, like, here are all the options for the green you could have in your garment. And they had formulas that they were using natural materials to dye, 20, 30 different shades of green that they could use. And they utilized what they had in their tools and the materials so efficiently and creatively that I'm really in awe, every time that I kind of unpick a piece of furniture or, a garment or whatever it is. And when you look at all the elements that went in, the labor that went into embroidering one waistcoat.
Oh yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, one of the things that I added in the expansion of A Gentleman's Daughter was David gets to look at a sample book, because drapers, fabric merchants would have books of samples, and at that time they were mostly sent from England to America, and so a lot of the designs there, the design on your fabric could be printed, it could be woven, or it could be embroidered. And all of these things had to be done more or less by hand. Like, there's a little bit of mechanization, but not much. And so he gets to see this beautiful weave, and it'll take months in a fabric that he wants to buy for Cassandra. It'll take months to get there from England. So he commissions a local silk. I think it's called a filatary. It might be filature, but a local silk producing effort that was started by Benjamin Franklin to weave this very fancy fabric design as a gift for Cassandra. And yeah, just the amazing effort, and the amount of effort that it takes to make like a single sequin is just amazing. They did have sequins. They were made out of metal. They were handmade. Like, it's amazing. And then of course the other important thing that I had to research for the book was smallpox, which I'm not medically minded, and so this was really kind of awful. And then as I wrote the inoculation scene, and the very next day I found a book that was published in, I think, 1769, maybe 1759, that described a brand new procedure for inoculating against smallpox. And I was like, well, of course, Dr. Rush, who has just finished his MD and is up on all the latest techniques, of course, this is what he would want to use. And Benjamin Rush is a historical figure. I don't actually know what method he would have used, but I then switched to this other method, and in the expansion I had the initial method where they cut your upper arm and put in a thread that has the infected material on it. That is done for the Hayes daughters who have to be inoculated. So yeah, a lot of research on that and what smallpox looks like. If you can avoid that, I would. I can't blame David for thinking the pustules are disgusting.
There's a scene in the HBO miniseries about John Adams where his wife and children are inoculated against smallpox, and then suffer the milder but still not mild version of smallpox, and it's pretty gory.
Yeah, and if you learn about the inoculations that George Washington had done during the winter at Valley Forge, or that before that, soldiers were trying to inoculate themselves by sticking pine needles under their nails with infected material on them. And you do get the infected material from people who are sick with smallpox and their pustules, but they were trying to inoculate themselves.
Absolutely disgusting, but also really incredible that they, without germ theory, were putting this together.
The germs had not been discovered. They didn't know what they were doing, but an inoculation or not inoculation, but vaccination comes along in 1796, which again, they don't know what germs are. They just noticed that Dr. Edward Jenner, who never went to medical school, he just noticed that cow milkmaids they would get cowpox on their hands, but then they wouldn't get smallpox. And then he figured out that if you use cowpox material, that you can, and cowpox is not life-threatening to humans, that you can then avoid being sick. And that's why vaccination has the same root in Latin as cows. So vaca.
Right.
And then of course, the other thing about the inoculation method that they were using before is that it actually came to the United States via an enslaved African named, I think it's pronounced Onesimus. And he introduced that because that was a practice that they had in Africa. They would actually, this is gross, but they would ground up the scabs from the pustules, and you might inhale them or whatever to be inoculated. So, and it took a long time to catch on in not the US, it wasn't the US, in the American colonies.
Right.
Yeah, because I mean, there was a general, they didn't know what germs were. They didn't, they didn't understand. So
there's a fair bit of medical technology and medical practices in A Gentleman's Daughter, and I not to sound like prideful about our current time, but it does seem like a lot of these practices that were standard medical treatment for that time, weren't efficacious and sometimes ended up hurting the patients. And you talk about different procedures that Cassandra learns. I noticed you didn't include Dr. Adam Drinker as an integral side character, and I think that reflects how much you love David, because he hates Dr. Drinker. It's partially a rival, at least.
Right, only in Dr. Drinker's mind is he a rival.
But Cassandra does learn how to provide some of these medical treatments, and it's definitely another interesting part of the book.
Yeah, and as weird as like a lot of their medical stuff, like in the book that I read about inoculation for smallpox, they recommend that you like eat ground crab claws, and that was a medicine. And we know that bleeding is a very popular method of, and one of their only, depending on the doctor, like Dr. Rush, he liked to bleed people, method for treating almost anything. It actually does fix some things. Like, it's not like, we're not recommending it for medically, but it will make your fever go down. And so, like, of course they thought that was working. But some of the other medical technology, like Cassandra goes on to use this medical knowledge to become a midwife. And, she's not called on super often because she is kind of high in society, but she, midwifery at the time, birth was just becoming medicalized in this era. And they were starting to go more toward doctors. And midwives had much better outcomes for their maternal patients, for their mothers and babies, than doctors did. And a lot of that knowledge was lost because of the medicalization of birth. So, yeah,
definitely. And we know that some of the natural medicines that some of the indigenous people were actually quite effective and are still used.
Yeah, absolutely. Like willowbark tea, we mentioned that in A Gentleman's Daughter. And that actually contains the same compounds as aspirin. So,
was there any part of real life that inspired you?
Are you asking me if there's a real David Beaufort? Because I wish.
We're still on the lookout for the real David Beaufort.
Yeah, and then we won't be writing any more books if we find him. We'll just be off living our best lives. Hayden, I'm recording this. Okay, you're making noise.
You mentioned you have sisters, and obviously that inspired you to write the sisters' relationships.
Yes.
Anything else?
I mean, I'm just really focused on wanting a real David. So yes, okay. The sisters' relationships were, my sisters' relationships were very inspirational for the sisters that we show in the book. Now, my sisters are not, very much like they're individuals, but what else?
I mean, you grew up in a family of only sisters, and that's the Hayes So that's
absolutely, yeah. So not directly in A Gentleman's Daughter, but having a lot of sisters. Their age gaps are pretty similar to mine and my sisters. So yeah, having all girls, I think it's the best. I mean, I love my sons.
I remember one of the things when we were thinking about the Hayes sisters that we talked about is from both of our experiences is that sibling relationships can be different. So you can have two siblings that get along really well and another pair that doesn't get along, and the relationships can be very complicated. And so we try to bring a little bit of that in there and show how, there can be certain siblings you can get very close to. Although Helen and Cassandra are just pretty close from the beginning. And
and they're very close in age. And then I love in Freedom's Ring when Cassandra is pregnant with their second, and obviously they don't know what they're having. And David hopes that it's a girl because their oldest is a girl, and he loves the relationship that Cassandra has with her sister, and he would love to have that for his children. He did not have a close relationship with his siblings. He does have older brothers, but they're much older and didn't really live with him. And then later in the series, we find out that some of their relationships were actually really, really bad. For him, like seeing his wife interact with her sister in such a positive way and their cousins in such a positive way is kind of a revelation. So
this book is for somebody who loves aristocratic, hot, stylish, that's the word I'm looking for, heroes.
The whole series is for it.
Yes, and
David is the series protagonist. We're not gonna lie.
Enemies to lovers, definitely. Who else would love this book?
Let's see. There, of course, historical romance readers. We think one of the things that we get a lot in our comments is that we know that Regency romance is very popular, and we love it. We do. We wanted to do something a little different, and a lot of people really love discovering this new period of history. People who do love the Revolutionary War will love that too. It's only hinted at in this book because it does start in 1770. So
did we disclose our backgrounds that led us to love this part of America? So I have a degree in political science and obviously studied quite a bit of American history.
Yep, and I have a degree in American studies and studied American history. I also taught a constitutional history and principles class as a TA. We were instructing TAs, so I taught the third hour of a class 3 or 4 times every week. So on the founding and the principles of the Constitution. So we don't get to the Constitution. So
no, we don't even get there yet. It's a whole other series.
That's where David becomes a private investigator and Owen helps him.
We can talk about a little bit probably about how we chose Philadelphia. I mean, I think one of the things that attracted us to that, like we're both from the East Coast, and so we're familiar with the area and the region. Yeah.
I had never been to Philadelphia, but now we have twice. So
one of the amazing things about Philadelphia is that it didn't see some of the housing booms of other large cities that have existed since the 18th century. And so there's this incredible preservation of 18th century buildings and architecture that we've now been twice to go and research and be able to touch and see and feel is really rich.
Joking. We did touch these buildings.
And laid on the ground. I laid on the floor of the Powell House and touched their dance floor. There's just, I think, thinking about like the Regency tradition and being able to go and see some of those historic buildings and places, like this is American history. Like this is where the founding happened. It happened in Philadelphia, and being able to go and
absolutely the iconic nature of the State House, or as it's called now, Independence Hall, the events that happen there. Like we feel like there's not a lot of fiction that really covers that. There is, I mean, we've got a lot of New York covered by Hamilton, promoting how great New York City is. It was not that great at the time, so shut up. But
yeah.
We definitely did not. A big reason why we wanted to do Philadelphia, I guess, is that we're from the South, but we did not want to set our book there because we did not want to in any way have to deal with trying to make heroes out of enslavers. So
we didn't want to romanticize slavery at all. And we also wanted to have a book, Philadelphia was a great hub of the abolitionist movement of the time.
absolutely. And the Quakers, it was, founded by Quakers, and, they were anti-slavery. So it made sense. It gave us the opportunity to create characters with sensibilities that we can relate to.
And very authentically, abolitionist characters based on the culture of Philadelphia and the history of Philadelphia. So yeah, I think that provided us with a really good opportunity as well. Hey, final question is David's best look.
Oh, all of David's clothes are iconic, so we'll just start from the beginning. In the opening scene, he wears a pale celadon green ditto suit. Oh, you mean he does? It's not a joke, but my favorite waistcoat of his, if we want to get specific, we love the waistcoats. My favorite waistcoat of his is the daffodil embroidered one that he wears in the proposal story. He I don't go into a lot of details on his waistcoats in the book, but that one, the proposal story, you can get when you're on our email list. So let's see. Oh, the other thing I love about daffodils are my favorite flower, and they're a symbol of Wales, which is just across the Bristol Channel from Somerset, so very close to Somerset. And the patron saint of Wales is Saint David. So super.
That's iconic. A lot. Perfect. My favorite of David's waistcoats comes in Devotion's Cause, because I love the one
that one's
but from A Gentleman's Daughter and related proposal story, that is a really good waistcoat. I mean, any waistcoat David is wearing is a good waistcoat. So
he looks good in whatever he wears. That's a great note to end on.
Definitely. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.